Hey everybody, very happy to be live today with three authors shortlisted for the McIlvenney Prize in for Bloody Scotland, and they're going to tell us a little bit about themselves and their books now. So with Ambrose, Parry, or Chris and Marissa, which would you prefer to be called?
Yeah, we're Chris and Marissa. Collectively, Ambrose. Yeah, I'm Chris Brookmeyer, author of now cumulatively 27 novels, on my own or with.
I'm Marissa Heatsman, I'm Chris's wife and writing partner, and together we are Ambrose Parry, and we're delighted that our book, The Corruption of Blood, has been shortlisted for the McIlvenney Prize.
Yeah, finalist. I'm not sure if you can term shortlist or finalist. It's down
that's
to
why
four.
That's why I was
paused. Yeah.
pausing, trying to get it right.
And it's our book is the third in the series, set in the history of medicine, all based on real events and real historical characters.
Fabulous.
I'm Alan Park, and it's May God Forgive, which is the fifth book, I think, in this series about Harry McCoy, who's a detective in Glasgow in the early 70s, and the books follow him and a bunch of people he works with or knows throughout the decade. So we're getting to about halfway through, and yeah, so it's very nice to be included in the list. It's always good when people like your book, so always a winner.
This isn't the first time for either of you, is it?
Well, we're in the happy position of A Corruption of Blood is the third Ambrose novel, and all three of the Ambrose Parry novels have made the shortlist. Obviously, we're hoping it's third time lucky, rather than always the bridesmaid. So yeah, the Way of All Flesh was shortlisted in 2019, and The Art of Dying was shortlisted in 2020. In a way, that was the hardest one, because the prize giving was a Zoom affair, and we were told in advance that if you're not the winner, your broadcast will just get cut. So we just disappeared from the screen. But this year we'll be there in person, and there's a torchlight parade or torchlight procession.
That sounds amazing.
One thing we've all got to march down with flaming torches. I think they're doing that before they announce who wins this year, I think, so that nobody's tempted to burn the person that won out of sheer jealousy.
What about you, Alan? Is it
a book called The April Dead got nominated last year and didn't win, which fair enough. So no, this is the second one. So we'll see how we get on. I think hopefully it'll be back to more of a kind of in-person thing than all Zooms and, from COVID and everything. So hopefully it should be a good night, I think.
Mm-hmm. I suppose if I'm blowing my own trumpet, I should point out that I've won the McIlvenney Prize on my own for in 2016 for Black Widow. So it's Marissa's holding me back with these three.
Mm-hmm.
What do you win when you win the prize then? As someone who's won on your own, what's the prize that you get given?
You win a still whiskey decanter, full lid. And I don't know if it's still the case, but there was £1,000 cash prize as well. But the whiskey.
Is it still the whiskey? Because it used to be the Deanston Brewery, and I don't think they sponsor it.
No, but it's one of the sponsors is a crystal manufacturer, and it turned out the people that own the crystal company live in our street. So I later found out in 2016 that the guy along the street knew I'd won it several days before I did, because I need to do the etching on it. But I don't have a beeline to him, to find out who's been asked to etch this year.
Well, you did a good job of keeping it secret.
Oh no, I didn't know. he did a very good job. No, he didn't know because it was someone at his office or someone that was doing it, and I only found out later.
So before I go into asking you questions about your writing, what do you think it is that sort of makes crime writing so strong and so beloved by people around the world?
What makes it
I think it's probably that people quite like reading about situations that they'll hopefully never be in, that they'll never be, in their head, or But I think it's a bit like horror books. People quite like to experience things they hope they'll never experience in their lives, and it's crime everywhere, so it sort of applies to every country, every place, that works across the world, I think.
But what do you think in particular about the Scottish crime fiction is incredibly popular, isn't it, sort of worldwide? What is it in particular about Scottish authors and Scottish writing?
I don't know that there is. I mean, I think there's popular authors from millions of countries. I think they're just these things kind of come and go. They used to be an awful lot of Australian writers, and then it just kind of ebbs and flows. A bit like bands, all of a sudden every band's from Liverpool or Manchester or whatever. So I think it's just one of those sort of waves that comes and goes.
Yeah, I think obviously there's been a huge sort of flowering of different and varied talent in Scottish crime fiction over the last 25, 30 years. But I'm always wary of that kind of exceptionalism, the sort of "was like us" sentiment, So it's not that we're doing it better than anybody else. There's maybe just there's a flavour about Scottish crime fiction that's appealing to certain people. And I think things like Bloody Scotland are really helpful in creating that sort of brand awareness of Scottish crime fiction. Obviously, it helps if you've got people of the profile of Ian Rankin and Val McDermott that are sort of international names, and that creates an association.
So I'm just when I was researching for this chat, both of your books are described as I'm just looking for the actual words of shining a light on cruelty, injustices, and I've lost the review, sorry. And inequalities in the time periods described. Do you want to tell us a bit about sort of what you've written in a bit more details of how you sort of shine those lights on those things in your novels?
I think from our point of view, we're fortunate in that we deal with the mid-19th century, and there's a huge amount of social injustice and things that we take for granted now that are quite interesting to explore from that period. Before the NHS, the welfare state, and there's so many things that you can.
I think there's also what excites us is that anything Victorian always connotes London, and I think we always felt like writing about Edinburgh's contribution to medicine at the time was colossal, when it never really been explored much in fiction. So it was like a great opportunity in that respect. And also from a crime fiction point of view, there's just so much death. There's so many ways to die, and there was so little ways of detecting it. That makes it a very rich scene. The fact that back at the time we're writing about, there wasn't proper death certification. You know, a doctor might not even go into a house. He would take the word of someone outside a tenement saying, "Oh yeah, old Charlie's died. You know, I think it was TB. You know," and no, the doctor, if he didn't like the look of the tenement, wouldn't even go in. You know, if it looked a bit smelly, and they could have just stabbed Charlie to death. And you know, so these kind of things, you know, the things that make you aware of how different the world is now, but also the things that make you realise that certain elements haven't changed at all.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what you said. Certain bits are still as grim for people as they were back then. So I think the book, my book, is just kind of deals with marginalised people. You know, they're not huge international crime figures, you know, with cartels and everything. They're kind of scraping about trying to make 20 quid. And, you know, I think if you write about people in those positions and you explain the social situation they're in, you know, you can see that, you know, even though it's in the 70s, it's still not that hugely different now. People still have difficulty paying their bills, they do stupid things. People get drunk and do stupid things, you know, and poverty tends to ruin people's lives in a huge amount of different ways. So I think it's maybe just about that. I mean, a lot of it's about, in the book, it's a bit about model housing, which doesn't exist anymore. But, you know, there's still places that are equally grim, but they're not called model housing anymore. They've just kind of been rebranded. So there's always poverty in every big city. And it's just that I think not most crime, it's a lot of crime, it's just more exciting if they rob a bank, steal £1 million, and you know, it's all this kind of stuff. But I quite like the sort of opposite of people, you know, getting stabbed for 10 quid or whatever, you know, because I think that's sometimes a bit more of an interesting way of looking at Glasgow, really.
Yeah, a corruption of blood. What that deals with, the title refers to some extent to heredity, and it's about what you inherit physically and if you're from a rich background, your chances are so much better, especially back then. So we wanted to look at that, and the title actually refers to a legal term to do with the corruption of a bloodline, but it's also about the fact that at that time, if you couldn't afford to raise a child, for instance, there was options available that are, well, I'm getting into spoiler territory, but options available that are truly horrific, and so we deal with that. We also deal with the highest level of society, and the fact that the plot revolves around a very rich and influential Edinburgh figure who dies, and his son is accused of poisoning him. So again, the sort of themes of heredity and material inequality are kind of what we got our teeth into. But these are things that are still relevant today. I think that's why people relate to the book.
Makes sense. So we've got really good questions. He says, congratulations on being shortlisted. Both of your series have a historical element. What do you think is the most interesting historical element of Scotland that you've not written yet?
I don't know. I think.
It's a good question.
Yeah, well, it depends what bits of history you're interested in. You know, history is obviously the whole world, so you kind of find, you know, and I think sometimes, you know, you don't want people in books saying to each other, "Oh, President Nixon has died today." You know, these big things. It's the little things historically that are kind of interesting when things shift, and you know. So I think those more kind of social history aspects are sometimes more interesting than, you know, great men type history, which is, you know, a bit dead. So I think it just depends. I mean, I tend to write quite a lot about people that are kind of homeless in the 70s, and that's just my interest in social housing and stuff. So, you know, history's so huge, you can pick anything you want. It just
Yeah, I think in our case, I mean, we couldn't say what period of history chose this because it was an area that had been neglected. You know, that Edinburgh medicine was so important and so influential, and this particular time was so interesting, but it hadn't really been mined for a lot of historical crime fiction. And the other thing is that when you talk about Edinburgh medicine in the Victorian era, people talk about Burke and Hare. That's the thing that's overmined, really. There's too much of an association with that. So we wanted to write about something that wasn't Burke and Hare. It was real events such as the discovery of chloroform by James Young Simpson. But interestingly, in keeping with what Alan said, it's not about the great individuals, it's about the social history of the time.
Yeah, I think that's more interesting for people. It's about characters living in a certain time rather than trying to explain or detail history. It's trying to just demonstrate maybe what their lives were like. And that's always small things, you know, it's not big events happening across the world. It's rent strikes, you know, people not having money or different, you know, legal aspects that come into their lives. And those little things, you know, that seem quite small in the scheme of things actually affect people hugely. And that's
Fiona said she loves that Ambrose are doing this from Greece. Are you actually in a taverna?
No, we're in the hotel lobby because the Wi-Fi is a bit better.
We're sharing a desk with the concierge so that we can put the laptop in.
And I'm sitting in the kitchen because that's where the Wi-Fi is.
We're all in different. I'm in the loft of my house. Both of you, good luck for next week. Do you do a lot of historical research hours in the Mitchell?
I do, mainly trying to find out what pubs were open in 1973. So that seems to be the main thing. And, you know, because it's sort of recent history, you just be slightly wary of having them going into a pub that was knocked down the year before or going, you know, along the way it didn't exist. So there's a lot of checking and a lot of, you know, that's just, you know, making sure you got it right. I mean, luckily, it was in Royston Road, so there wasn't that much to check on. But the last stuff, you know, the COVID thing just stopped in time for me to go everything in about 3 days. Luckily, this time, Royston Road's a bit different than it was, not hugely different. And, you know, I just spent time there asking people things. So it's not always Mitchell. Mitchell's helpful, but sometimes it's good to go to the actual place and speak to people that lived there at the time, and you know, which normally just causes people to argue about what was there and what wasn't. But you get a kind of flavour of the area, I think.
And what about you guys with your historical research? I'm presuming the Mitchell is like a really famous library up in Scotland. Somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think most of our research is Edinburgh based, so we actually, I did a lot of research for a history of medicine degree at the Lothian Health Board's archives. So I've done some kind of primary research there, but a lot of the research that we use is digitized archives, which has been a godsend during COVID, etc. So you can still access a lot of documentation without. Digitizing of archives, I just think it's just the most incredible thing. It gives access, really easy access to people who are interested, and I think it's fantastic.
It's funny when they brought one of my books in Belfast, and I went to the Belfast Telegraph library, and it's still the actual papers and huge, big, you know, enormous leather things. And what happens is people go along and they see, like, you know, announcement of their auntie's funeral, and they cut it out. So there's like big holes in the newspaper where you're trying. It's always the bit you want. So you know, I thought, great, it's the actual paper, and it tends to be more difficult to deal with than the digital. So, but yeah.
I, 'cause, 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 ' I'm looking up. We've got quite a few questions that have come in. T has asked which of your characters you'd take out for a meal. Presuming you could travel back in time to them.
Yeah. Well, that's easy for us, isn't it?
Or James John Simpson.
Yeah, definitely. Well, he's I'd like to go to his house for dinner actually, if he would invite us, because I think you would get good food, and he would usually bring out the chloroform for a bit of after dinner entertainment. So it'd probably be a good laugh. And he always invited lots of anyone who was interesting in Edinburgh. Excellent dinner party, and I would love to have attended one.
We wouldn't go out for dinner with Raven because he likes a fight.
That's right, get you into trouble.
He's the only character I've ever written, a sort of heroic character, a protagonist that does like a fight. I tend to write people that are more reflective of my own proclivities. And but Raven is a bam. He does like. As his friend Henry always says, there's a kind of element of him that is always kind of howling at the moon. He's got a darkness in him. So if he went out to the pub and he thought tonight's the night for a rammy, there's nothing you can do about it.
Alan, who do you take out for a meal?
There's a bad guy in the books called Stevie Cooper I'd probably take out because I think he'd be slightly more entertaining than the detective. So again, a bit like that, he's probably ready to cause a fight. But there used to be these things in Glasgow called Bernie Inns, which were a real Stackies thing. And they were the first kind of restaurants that kind of normal people went to that, for birthdays and stuff. And I vaguely remember them, and they were all red inside and, sort of shields and, and it was kind of the first time we'd ever been to a restaurant, and you got like a gammon steak with pineapple on the top, and it seemed really glamorous. So I think that's where we go, because I'd like to go back there.
You've also been asked which character you dislike the most. So have you ever written a character that you really, really dislike?
What?
No, I can't think of
She's
one.
giving me an accusing look.
No. Who do we really dislike?
Obviously, the
villains.
The villains are murdering lots of people.
Yeah.
But often they're sort of disguised in some way, and also you want your villains to be strangely sympathetic. You want people to understand why they do what they do, even if you can't condone it. But
I wouldn't go out for dinner with any of them.
There was only really one I didn't like. I think in the first book or the second book that Harry McCoy had a girlfriend called Susan, who was just really annoying. So she got sent off to Manchester to do a PhD. So she didn't have to be in the books anymore. But that's about it.
Fair enough. Now, Alan, in your descriptions on your author page, it says that you like walking the streets of Glasgow to find inspiration.
Yeah.
Is that where else do you find story inspiration from? And Chris and Marissa, where do you get your inspiration from?
I wander about because I do it a strange way. I find places that I want to write about, and then I have to find some way to join them together. So, and also when you wander about things, there's not this book, but the book before, there was a murder of someone. Someone got killed in novel world in Shettleston. And I just had to find a close to say it was number such and such. So I went to Shettleston Road, walked up there, and I thought, that close will do. Then I looked across the road, and there was a really weird pub called the Palaceum there, which is huge. And I thought, well, if the person that murdered that would be his local. So I sort of started research into that, and it used to be called the Edrum. And in the 70s, it was one of the only two pubs in Glasgow that travelling people were, welcomed and were felt safe going to, and weren't sort of the last to leave. So that then became part of the plot. So sometimes just walking about gives you quite good inspiration, about how to stick bits together. So yeah, there's a lot of one. But that's good.
Well, we're lucky, I guess, again, because the books were set in Edinburgh, that the Edinburgh of the 19th century is quite well represented. You town and get a feeling of walking.
Have we lost them? Do we think?
Well, it seems to have frozen a wee bit. It might come back.
You notice how people always freeze on a really glamorous face?
Maybe they'll come back. I hope so.
Hello.
Oh,
From strong.
nope.
No, I think we've lost them for the moment.
Maybe they need to rejoin or something. I don't really know how it works.
We'll take them out for the moment, and then we'll see if we drop them back in, and if that helps. Alan, you've been asked if you ever run your ideas past anyone.
Nope. It's a pretty simple question.
Nope. Good answer.
We're back.
Hello, you're back?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
We were asking you about where you found your inspiration. Do you want to give us that answer again?
Yes.
I think you broke up.
Oh, right, okay. We were just saying that walking around Edinburgh is quite inspiring because a lot of the places we write about still exist. But mainly the inspiration just comes from a lot of the history of medicine, things that I've read about for my degree, really, that there's like a mass of stuff that we haven't got through yet.
Is it gone wonky again?
Does look like it. I mean, they've done well.
Oh, yeah?
Mostly from Greece, haven't they?
Yeah, maybe it's this question that's blowing up the connection.
Yeah, well, we won't ask them it again. Say Ambrose.
Everything.
Sam wants to know, Alan, if you get feedback when you're told about your nomination.
No, not really. You just get kind of told. I don't think that's it, really. You just get told. There's no sort of debrief or anything like that, you know?
And there's no debrief at all.
No, you just get a sort of phone call saying you've been nominated or whatever, and that's kind of it, really. No, nothing more than that. And then you just get told where to go in the night and all that sort of stuff. But that's it, really.
Ah, fair enough. Alex wants to know if you could tell him what the quirkiest thing you've seen or done at Bloody Scotland is.
What the what is?
What the quirkiest thing you've seen or done at Bloody Scotland is.
I don't think I've seen or done anything quirky at Bloody Scotland, to be honest. It's just a bunch of people sitting in a sort of hotel bar. It's not the most bacchanalian event of all time. It's just kind of people seeing each other they haven't seen for a while and having a drink, really. I'm afraid it's like a sort of school reunion sort of thing because there's a lot of people you don't see from one year to the next. So it's more like that, really, than some mad, event. So it's not that quirky.
Yeah, I feel like we'd have got a better answer if we asked you about your previous career with like working in music and stuff.
Maybe, yeah.
Better stories like that.
I'll be a bit discreet about that one. No, I'm sorry that it's not more quirky at Bloody Scotland, but maybe it will be this year. You never know. It could go nutty. But yeah, it's just, as I said, it's kind of more like a school reunion than most things, which is fine.
Apparently, there's a games night this year.
Is there? Well, I must. I don't know what that is, says he helpfully. I don't even know what it is. No.
No, Lindsay, give us more information about the games night. She is going to Bloody Scotland. I know that.
All right, maybe she knows more than I do about it. I'll have to stick with her and see what's going on.
You've been asked if you've ever been to crime at the coup.
Have I
I
what?
said that right.
Have
Have
I
you
what?
ever been to crime at the coup?
Nope.
Nope.
I'm sorry, I'm the worst person to be asking these questions. I haven't done anything or done anything.
Yeah, because your answers are no.
Have you sat in the tower and watched TV? Yes. Have you been for a drink at the bar? Yes. Have you done much else? Nope. Sorry about that. I'm not making a very good advert for bloody Scotland. Yeah, I should be a bit more on the ball.
Do you have any advice for anyone who's writing a book? Is what Sam has asked.
Well, people always say, write what you know, and I don't think that's really a good. I think what you should do is write what you're interested in, because you're going to be stuck with it for a year or so, and there's not much point starting a book, getting a couple of months in, and thinking I really hate writing about Bradford or crime in the 40s or something. You have to be fairly sure that you've got a big enough subject or a big enough time or area that you can spend a year faffing about with it. So I think you don't necessarily need to have experienced it, but I think you have to be pretty interested in it, or you'll soon kind of lose heart, if you know what I mean. It's hard enough writing a book, and writing a book about something that you're suddenly not very enamored with or excited by is hard. So I think that's really the first thing, is to just make sure that you've got the right thing that you want to write about, and then from there it's just you just have to, people say, oh, how do you just have to start, do you know what I mean, just to write chapter one and do something. It's it might, and more often than not, it never ends up as the actual chapter one, but you kind of just have to start going, really, and see where it leads you, and then try and do a bit, as often as you can, I think. But I say, yeah, I never do that. It's a bit, mine's a bit like homework. They say the book's due in October, and I don't do anything until September. Then have a panic attack and do it all the night before. So it's a bit like not doing your homework till Sunday. You kind of a bit of a rush and a push at the end. But yeah, it's as I say, it's good fun if you're interested in the thing. And I've done it a few times, and I've been writing. I think I'm bored. So God knows that people that read this are going to be bored. So this is not the right bit for me to be writing. So I think that's the main thing, really.
I am very much like you. I am a teacher. I left all of my planning and work till Friday before I went back to school, and I'm regretting my life choices now that everyone is back and I'm not organised. But I had a nice holiday.
Let's be honest. Yeah, I think everyone does that. It is literally like, oh my God, it's 5 o'clock on Sunday, I better do my homework. So yeah. I think that's kind of everyone's. Do it on the bus on the way to school. So it's that sort of
and
bit large.
I'm sure all children would love to know that teachers do the same thing as well. So, what is it particularly about 1970s Glasgow that really gets you interested enough that you've been able to write so many books in it?
Well, it's a time period I can kind of remember because I was 10, so it's quite vivid. And where the books are set are kind of North Glasgow and Springburn and the Milton and Postle, which is where my parents came from and where a lot of my aunties and uncles and cousins were. So I used to go up and visit them all the time, and I lived in a village which was incredibly boring. So you went there and it was exciting because there was lots of kids and there was dogs and there was people running about. So it was a very vivid time, and I think it's crime in Glasgow, says he, pompously pontificating, changed a lot in the early 80s because drugs came in wholesale, and once that happens, the sort of personal contact becomes less. People hole up in their houses, coked out their brain and paranoid, or they go to Spain because they think they're being followed by the police. And, it becomes a much less one-to-one event. So I quite like the idea that, when people were moneylenders, would go around and collect money and they sort of hurt people if they didn't pay it back. It was like, £4. It wasn't a huge amount. And I think once you get to the giant sort of million quid drug deals, it's interesting, but it's just a different kind of crime novel, and it's a different kind of story. I quite like the fact that they still are in contact with people, and the bad guys still actually have to physically beat or knife someone else. It's not all removed and kind of driving past in a car and shooting out the window. You know, it's still all one-to-one contact. So that's a bit about the 70s. I think is quite interesting, and the policing was less enlightened than it is now. So that makes it again a bit more interesting to write about. So it's just a time I like, and it's I'm always kind of glad to go back and write it. And I think Glasgow, like most cities at that time, was, you know, in a bit of a state. The heavy industry had gone. No one was quite sure where they were going to make any money. You know, they were knocking down the city centre to move everyone out to housing schemes. So there was a lot going on. So I think that's the interesting bit about it, really. And then when you get to the early 80s, it's all cocaine and cappuccinos, which is great, but it's a whole different ballgame, you know.
Fair enough. Steve Munoz, one of our lovely readers from California, says he loves your McCoy series,
Oh,
and he is 3 books in. Please tell him that McCoy will be with us for a while.
He will, if all goes to plan, he'll be here for another 6 books at least, so till we get to the end of the 70s. That's the plan. But that sort of entails people buying them, but there you go. But that's the grand plan, that we get to the kind of very end of the 70s, very beginning of the 80s, and that's 12 books, and that's kind of enough about anyone, I think. So that's the big plan. Whether it will happen, I don't know, but we'll see.
That'll make Steve very happy.
You got another 9 to go, Steve. You're gonna wish you'd never happened. Wish you'd never wished for them.
Don't. He's an avid UK crime fiction fan.
All right. Okay. Well, yeah, he'll be around.
Yeah, I think he'll be. Yeah, he said it's great to hear, so I can imagine he'll be very chuffed. Sam has said she loves the quote from the Herald, which says, "An amiable bear of a man who these days spends his time wandering around Glasgow thinking up ways to murder people. Have you got a stock of places to hide bodies in future books?"
Fair enough quote. Well, it's weird. As I said, it works a lot on places. You know, I wander about until somewhere starts to become interesting, and then that the physical place sort of dictates the story in a way. You know, it's as I said, with that pub, suddenly your story goes in a different direction, and you know, and also when I was there up that way, there's a lot of show people that run fairs, still live in Glasgow in these weird little compounds, which you don't really notice until you start noticing them, and then you see them quite a lot, and it's like 5 or 6 caravans, and often there's a sort of rides parked, and once you start seeing them, you think, God, these are everywhere. It's kind of weird. So that was kind of interesting to write about. But often things like that are quite hard to get information on because they're not sort of proper history, if you know what I mean. Trying to get history of show people is quite a difficult thing, you know. So eventually I spoke to someone who was very helpful and sort of took you through it, and you know, said things like they call money Burke and all that, you know. So it's quite interesting doing this. And so I think that again became part of the last book. So, and you know, this book, it was all set in Royston, partly because of COVID, because during COVID, as I'm sure you can remember, you couldn't really do exercise. You had to go outside. You couldn't go to the gym or any of that sort of stuff. So I started doing outdoor exercises in a park in Royston, simply to get you out of the house. Not that was particularly athletic, but it was like, great, I'll get out of the house for an hour. And so I'm standing in Royston, sort of jumping about doing these exercises. And I'm thinking, oh, that's quite an interesting area there. That's, you know, there's a high flat there. I wonder what you can see from that. And there's a hill over there. So it kind of dictated, the places often dictate what the story is. So that the reason for Royston, which is a little bit of Glasgow, it's not big at all, is because of COVID, because that was where it went for your exercises. So it's often the kind of weirdest things, you know, that set off an idea of something of, you know, where a body might be discovered, or you know, what was happening there at the time, and how you can make it work into the book and stuff. So yeah, it's there's some places waiting for bodies to be discovered, so they're there.
So when you go on those wanders, do you take like a camera with you and take photos?
Yeah, well,
later on?
Take your phone, and you know, that's the easiest way to do it. It's and then you get that, and then you sort of go back, and then you start going, well yeah, what was there at that time? You know, what was built, what wasn't, you know, did it still look like that, and what was that area for? You know, did people work there? Was it, you know, a kind of? So yeah, you just have to, you know, and Glasgow's not huge, so you can kind of just wander about, and find places. So the book I'm writing just now is set in a bit of Glasgow called Postle, which is a small bit of Glasgow. But I've been wandering about up there, and that always helps. I like to be kind of geographically centred, so I know where everything is. And so I've been up there a lot, just seeing where the pubs are, where people would walk to, what the shops were, and all that, where the police station was, and it all helps, and it helps you add to the story. I think when you get ideas about where you can put things.
I think it's fascinating how much cities change as well, isn't it? I've lived in Leeds now since like the late 1990s. I moved here for university.
Yeah.
The amount that the city has changed just in that time, from like then till now, is huge. Like there's whole bits that have just disappeared.
Yeah, it's nuts. Well, there's an area of Glasgow called Townhead, which there is nothing left of it at all. So I can't, and I wanted to write about it, but I can't, because I can't, even when I go there, it's just there's none of it left, and I can't really work out where everything would have been and all that stuff. So yeah, you're right. Some places just kind of get wiped off the map, and there was a big road called Parliamentary Road up there, which is a huge, big, busy high street, and I still can't quite work out where it was and what it adjoined to. So it's been so decimated. The motorway took a lot of it out, and some housing took a lot of it out. So yeah, the Glasgow, like every other city, changes really quickly, and you also kind of forget what places were like really quickly, because if they build a shopping centre, you kind of forget what was there before, so they do change a lot, and areas change their kind of function, which is quite interesting. Areas kind of go up or down, and students all suddenly move to one area because the flats are cheap, and so it's an interesting thing in itself, just the evolution of cities and how quickly they do change. So yeah, and Glasgow's, as I said, like every other one, it does that the same.
What were the industries that you said it were kind of disappearing in the sense? It was shipbuilding in Glasgow, wasn't it?
There's a lot of shipbuilding. There's a lot of ironworking and train building, and just basic heavy industry. Like the big forge. But you go sometimes to Australia or something, and you see a big iron gate, and it was made in Glasgow. It's strange. It's they just made big heavy things, proper industrial processes, and when that kind of fell away, a lot of kind of working men that had that environment all their life, that was slightly physical and very kind of full of people they knew and their age and everything. When that got pulled away under their feet, it's really hard for a lot of people to get another job, and B, to have a job that's as much part of them as you suddenly would see, like big guys who'd previously working in the co-op, behind the till, and it was just really strange. But I suppose people have to adjust to things. But it was just your classic. I'm sure Leeds was probably the same. Manchester, it's just your classic heavy industry, that kind of fell away towards the end of the 60s and the early 70s.
Yeah, I think a lot of places where I haven't lived in Leeds all my life, but you can sort of see the way that the industry's changed. Laura said you wouldn't have Parry stumble into something on his holidays elsewhere in Scotland.
Could do. It's not a bad idea. He's been to Ireland, which is quite an interesting thing, because Belfast, I kind of know Belfast really well, as I thought, because I go there a lot. But you forget, as you will probably be able to do with Leeds now, if I said to you, okay, if someone's a 42-year-old whiz kid lawyer, where would they live in Leeds? What restaurant would they go to? What shop would they go to? You would kind of know automatically, because you're so familiar with the city. So when you go to Belfast, I thought I better check some things, and you don't have that quick fire residual knowledge, so you have to check even more, and that's a city I thought I knew quite well. But where you live, you don't realise how much you know about it till you try and do the same thing somewhere else and find out that you really don't know that other city as much as you think, But
I think a city that you're from, I would imagine, like Glasgow.
Yeah.
For instance, probably you have a deeper knowledge of anyway. Like if it's a city that you were born and grown up in, you're going to know a lot more about it than someone that's even, like, I know I said I lived in here a long time, but I'm not from Leeds. It doesn't have that same kind of deeper understanding.
It's just an accumulation of knowledge of trivial little things about where things are, and what kind of place that is, and and when I came, having said all that, I lived in London for 20 years, and then came back and started doing night classes on Glasgow's industrial past, which was great because one week you were in the lecture theatre and the man would talk to you about it, and then you go on a walk the next day. And because it was the industrial past, it wasn't the kind of touristy bits of Glasgow or the particularly nice bits of Glasgow. It was, the slightly odder bits, and I hadn't been in them for years, and it was really interesting to see how much they'd changed. And walking about there kind of started me thinking about writing something about those kind of areas and what was still there. So.
Sam saying she's from Manchester and I had to show her around when I came to visit because things changed so quickly.
It's true, it does change remarkably quickly.
She also said moral philosophy must have been an interesting subject to study. Do you find it useful when creating characters and situations you put them in?
It probably was an interesting subject to study, but I can't even remember a bloody word of it, if I'm being honest. It was so long ago. Well, I think all characters in all books have to make moral decisions. Even if it's a kind of domestic drama, they have to go, will I leave my wife, or should I walk out in this job? People make those decisions all the time. It's just sometimes in crime fiction they're a bit more obvious in a way. It's they're a bit more heightened. But those decisions are the same decisions people make all the time. It's just, as I said, in crime they kind of, there's more of them, and police have to make more of them, and criminals have to make more of them than someone who, say, works in Argos or whatever. They're not confronted with those situations so often. So, yeah, it's an interesting bit to look at. But I think it's the same of all books. Are really about, that's really what they're about: decisions that people make. How it changes their lives and how they deal with it. Really,
I think that for me, I like books where the characters are really sort of genuine human beings. So I think that's what you're saying about where they're in those situations where they're making decisions and you can sort of see that thought process and things, and it makes them feel more real to you.
Yeah, I don't. I'm sort of always a bit wary about these books where someone's been a mild-mannered accountant for 40 years and then their wife gets kidnapped and they suddenly become like, James Bond and fashion sort of gadgets out of bits of paper and chewing gum and chase international villains across the world, with 7 different passports. It's like, I don't think that would really happen. So I think what I try and do is write characters that then have jobs. I didn't really write Harry as a policeman. He was kind of a person that was a policeman. And I think, and Stevie Cooper is a person who is a criminal. So I think if you do it that way round, you hopefully get slightly more interesting characters. Because if you think, I'm going to write a policeman, you have this set of ideas that you're going to knock into, but if you write it to go, well, who would be an interesting person to be a policeman, and that's, or who would be an interesting person to be a murderer, or, so I think you kind of have to get the character first and then you worry about what they have to do, if you know what I mean. It's, if you don't, you tend to get these very kind of slightly obvious characters that are either really evil or they're and I just don't really think people are well, maybe they are, I don't know, but hopefully most people aren't like that. They're kind of a balance of a lot of different things. So I think characters are really, I mean, I can't, any book you read, crime book, any book, if they don't have interesting characters, you're not going to read it. I mean, who cares? It's plots, like, but if you don't care about the person, you're not going to care about the fact they've been pushed off a cliff, so you kind of have to set up interesting people and then have horrible things happen to them. And that's the kind of way to do it, I think.
But I think that's an interesting thing in your books, isn't it? Because Harry's got this kind of, he is a policeman and that does define a lot of what he does, but then he's got that interesting kind of history as well.
Yeah.
That sort of also, you can kind of see where some of the people are coming from, and it impacts his choices a bit.
Yeah, I think he came from a background in care where he was very much let down by all the institutions that were supposed to look after him, be that the church or, social workers or anything. And I think when that happens, he's now got a sort of default distrust of supposedly helpful institutions in it. And he's got a huge interest in people he feels have been kind of chucked under the bus, and haven't really had a fair play of the cards, So I think that motivates a lot of what he does, and he's probably slightly too interested in those people rather than doing his actual job, because he tends to get, involved in cases where the actual crime can be pretty slight, but he's very concerned about the person, and he knows that if they just go to any other police station, they won't pay attention. They'll just go, some homeless guy's lost his stuff, who cares, So I think that's where he's slightly different. His first priority is not so much solving crimes as trying to help people he thinks that police don't normally help. So
he's almost a little bit kind of what you'd like to imagine a police person would be a bit like now. He sort of does want to help people, but a little bit ahead of his time.
Yeah, well, you kind of hope that until you're like, someone's robbed my house, can you find my bloody stuff? So he's great if you want to be amiable, but I imagine he's slightly frustrating if you're like, where's my car that somebody's stolen? And he's like, well, I don't care, you're a rich person with a car, I can care less, So, yeah, it's a bit of a funny one, but yeah, he's kind of on the, because weirdly, I know the police get a lot of stick, and probably rightly so, but there's an awful lot of very liberal, very concerned people in the police force these days, and it's certainly not what it was in the 70s. So he's a kind of, as you said, a kind of hopefully a little bit of a glimpse of the future to come.
Steve said he's fascinated by the number of Scottish writers looking back at the 70s in Glasgow. The Jew and Val McDermid in 1979, and Liam McIlvenney with The Recent Quaker and The Heretic. What was your impression of those books? Did they catch?
Well, the thing is, everyone's got their own 70s to catch. It's not like there's a definitive 1970s. Everyone's got a different view of it, and and everyone addresses it a different way. It's there's not a fixed idea of what the 70s was, and Liam's book, in fact, they have a different aspect of it, and they look at different areas of it. So I think even though they're set in the same time, they look at different bits of that. I mean, and that's kind of why they're interesting books. There's not a kind of 70s that you regurgitate. I think you kind of have to find your own 70s and make it interesting for people. And obviously they've done that, and that's why the books are good and people like them, because they've found a bit that they want to concentrate on, and that's that's hopefully what makes them work, I think.
And Alex wants to know about the musical influences of the period that may have affected your plots, given that you have 12 in the series.
Not gold. I'm not sure the musical. Well, there's a book. One of the books, Bobby March Will Live Forever, is kind of the most musicy one, because it's about a rock star that, when Brian Jones left or was kicked out of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, they auditioned a lot of strange people. They auditioned Ry Cooder and, a whole bunch of strange people. And the idea in the book is that they auditioned him and they asked him to join, and he was so sure he was going to become a big rock star by himself, he turned them down, which sadly turns out to be the worst decision he's ever made. So, that was a kind of kick-off point, and through the book, there's little bits of his kind of musical journey. And if you're an extremely sad musical sort of person like me, there's a lot of clues as to who these people are and where they are, and who they really are, and even without describing where they are, you would know who they, who or what the situation was. And that was quite good fun to do the little flashbacks to each bit of his career. And that's kind of interesting. Straight music, I'm not sure it's had that much influence in the plots. It's I don't know if that would happen, but it certainly plays a little bit. I mean, David Bowie's in the first book for about, I think, one sentence. And it's fun to put those things in, but I always kind of write about the downtime or the backstage or the waiting for something, rather than the on stage being adored by millions of fans. It's and music, it's a very evocative thing. If you put music in your book, people immediately remember when they heard it, and they sort of know what time it was and where it came from and everything. So it's quite an easy indicator of things. So there's a lot of music in it, but I think it's probably more tangential than the actual plot device. I think Bobby March is probably the nearest one. But yeah, so yeah, there's a lot of it in, but it costs. I found out rather stupidly, I should have known, I've worked in the music industry, but you have to pay so much bloody money to quote songs. So you kind of end up with, 20 songs and then you end up with 2. You have to pay for all the quotes.
But then at the same time, I genuinely bought a book once because the book title and the inside cover had a quote from a song from a band that I really liked.
Oh, why
And I was
not?
like, if it's named after a band I really like and it's got a quote from the song, I'm probably going to like the book because that person.
Yeah. Similar taste, maybe.
Yeah. So one of our admins, Patsy, is an amazing supporter of Scottish crime and Scottish authors. She goes to all the festivals, she meets people, she probably badgered you with bookmarks and all sorts. Who would you recommend? Who would you recommend as like your go-to author to read?
Of Scotland or anyone?
Of Scotland. Let's go with Scotland.
Oh God. I like Liam's books actually because I like the fact, his detective is in my book, my detective in his book. Because in imaginary world, they actually lived around the corner from each other. So we thought it'd be quite funny if they bumped into each other. And that's quite funny to read someone else writing your character. It's quite strange, but I quite like that. And he's very good on the mechanics of police investigations and the way they actually do it, which I'm not so good on. And it's just always interesting reading about kind of the same situations in the same time, but from another viewpoint, So that's always interesting to read, So I think I'm sure she has read them, but if she hasn't read them, that's good ones to read, I think.
Good recommendation. Sam has said thanks for a good interview. Best of luck to you. Thank you for staying on.
They probably don't care. They probably offer a drink in the Greece, at the seaside. Probably have a great time. But no, it's a shame we lost them.
It is a shame we lost them, but thank you so much for staying on and being a fascinating person to interview on your own right. And best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Guys.
Yep, thank you. It was nice to have me. Well, not nice to have me. Nice to be here, I should say.
Just remind people of what books they're going to buy or what books they're going to buy.
5 of them. No, they're going to buy. The latest one is called May God Forgive, which is a cheery tale of death and desperation in 70s Glasgow.
And if they're starting fresh, what's the first book in the series to start with?
The first book is called Bloody January, which is a cheery tome about death and desperation in Glasgow in the early 70s, a couple of years earlier. So I suppose maybe if you start at the beginning, you can either decide whether you like them or not. So,
but thank you, and then all that's left to say is thanks for joining us, and best of luck.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much. See you later.